today and the next day we are in class, we are talking about biomes. So we will use biomes to kind of get us through the rest of this week and kind of transition into next week. So let's just kind of jump into it. We are talking about biomes. Now, let's see. A biome is a group of ecosystems with similar biotic and abiotic factors. A group of ecosystems with similar biotic and abiotic factors. There are several ways to categorize. Oh my goodness. But usually we use climate and typical plant and animal life. So we can take a look at a bunch of ecosystems, and if we decide that those ecosystems have really similar climates and really similar animals and plant life, then we can group them together into biomes. So a desert could be or deserts in general are a type of biomes. The tropical rainforest is a type of biome. All that fun stuff. So, yes, we're just gonna make this real big. There we go. So, we're gonna start specifically talking about biomes and climate. If the climate is going to be our major abiotic factor, we're going to get into it just a little bit. Specifically, starting with the definition of climate. Have we talked about the difference between weather and climate in this class? I get them mixed up. Okay, cool. So, climate is the average conditions of an environment, including temperature and precipitation. Temperature and precipitation. And this is over long periods of time. In a given area. This is different than weather. Weather is the day-to-day atmospheric conditions. So if I open the windows, I was like, it is cool outside. It is not raining outside. That is our weather. But if we talk about yearly averages in temperature and yearly averages in precipitation and the way the weather changes over the course of the seasons, that would be considered climate. Scientists use climate diagrams or climatographs to describe ideal conditions in a biome. To describe ideal conditions in a biome. And that kind of looks something. There's no E in climate diagram. Like this. So we got we've got our months. January. You've seen that TikTok and it's like January, February, March, April, May, June, July, Jason Derulo. Yeah, I can't write that out without thinking of it that now. So on this axis, we are going to talk about temperature. So we're going to graph temperature. Let's say this is somewhere in Zimbabwe. And then on average, the temperature sits at a stable line. So our temperature doesn't change much. We've got relatively mild to moderate conditions all year round. But on this axis, we are going to mark precipitation. So we've got more rain up here and less rain down here. Let's say through April, we've got a lot of rain. And then we have kind of like a dry season. And then around October, it shoots back up again. When in this area where the rain is higher, or the precipitation is higher than the temperature, this is going to be our wet season. And in this area right here, this is going to be our dry season. And a lot of the times, climate scientists will use these to describe our biomes. They'll say, okay, they'll look at two places, they'll look at these climatographs for two different places, and if they look really similar, they can classify those two ecosystems within the same biome. So that's climate and biomes. We are going to talk next about our organisms. Biomes and organisms. All right, so as we learned about in our evolution lesson, natural selection results in organisms surviving that are best suited for the environment. So natural selection means living organisms are best suited for their environments. Plants and animals will adapt. Plants and animals are adapted to their environments. If you take a walrus, walruses live in really cold environments. If you took one and you plopped it on the shore of Raccoon Lake, it would not last very long. It would overheat pretty quick because it's adapted to its colder environment. From this, we can kind of infer that ecosystems in the same biome have organisms with similar adaptations. If you have a very similar environment to an ecosystem across the world, your plants and animals are exposed to the same kinds of pressures. And because those animals are exposed to the same types of pressures, they wind up with very similar adaptation. If you look at animals that live in the North Pole and animals that live on the South Pole, they're not the exact same animals, but they both have to be adapted for those really, really frigid, cold environments. One last thing before I get into the types of biomes. And that is net primary production. Scroll up just a little bit. We're going to talk about net primary production. This is a very, very important quality of a biome. Net primary production is the amount of organic matter also called biomass that remains after cell respiration. So we talked about photosynthesis and cell respiration. If our primary producers are our photosynthesizers, our chemosynthesizers, the organisms that can create their energy, or not create energy, but can harness and transform energy into a form they can use. So they trap that energy in sugars, and they will break those sugars down for energy. And they can use that energy to build up more of themselves. As plants grow, they have to use the energy that they made to make sure that they are growing and making sure that whatever they're building is strong and can withstand their daily environments. Biomass is just that. It's all of the organic matter that's not being burned up by cellular respiration. Biomes vary in net primary production. Warm, wet biomes have a lot. Have a lot of primary production. Cold, dry environments have less. There are 10 biomes that we're going to talk about. This information is important. Make sure you get this down because we will do our last hybrid day activity involves using this information to create something. I'll talk about that a little bit the next time we're in class. But on Thursday, I think for you, Thursday is your last hybrid day. So you will be doing that then, and you will need this information. So there are 10 biomes. I'm going to go through them all, break them down, give you some key vocab words, some key terms, some abiotic and biotic factors that characterize that biome. So we're going to take a little trip around the world together. We might not finish that trip around the world today. We might have to come back to it the next time we're together, but we'll get started at least. So we're going to hop in a plane, and we are going to Brazil, the country, not the city, to the tropical rainforest. Our tropical rainforest example, like I said, is Brazil. Our abiotic factors. It is hot and wet all year long. So on that little graph that we drew, instead of having that wet and dry season, our precipitation level would be about the same all year round, and our temperature level would be about the same all year round. Our biotic factors get a little bit more complicated. And by just complicated, I mean there's more information there. There are three vocab words. The first is canopy. Canopy is that layer of dense leafy growth at the tops of trees. So if you think about it, we got all the trees in the rainforest. There's so many of them that all of the leaves up at the top kind of create an entire layer. This layer allows for the creation of the understory. The understory is everything under that canopy, the shrubs and vines that compete for light. A lot of the time when we think about competition, we think about organisms fighting one another for something like food or water. But competition can also exist within plants as they grow taller than one another or try to block out one another. to compete for something like sunlight. And then there is something called biodiversity. Biodiversity is the number of species in an area. The tropical rainforest has the highest. Biodiversity. Meaning, if you took a list of all of the organisms that lived, or all the different types of organisms that lived in all of the biomes, you put them on a list, and then you took all of the organisms that lived in the tropical rainforest, and you took them out of that first list and put them in a second list. That list for the tropical rainforest would be longer because we have more species in the tropical rainforest than in all of the other biomes combined. It is really, really crooked. So that is the tropical rainforest. From there, we are hopping on another plane and heading over to India from the tropical rainforest to the tropical dry forest. So the tropical dry forest, our example is, like I said, India. Our abiotic factors, we get both dry and rainy seasons. So tropical dry forests are like tropical rainforests, except we get a dip in the amount of precipitation that exists within the tropical dry forest. So we get both a rainy season and a dry season. Our biotic factors, our plants, are adapted for drought, meaning they have to have a way to survive those dry seasons. And our animals reduce the need for water through something called estivation, which is essentially hibernation, but instead of avoiding the cold and starvation, they're avoiding dehydration. So they'll go into like power saving mode so they don't have to go out and look for water in these dry seasons. They can also migrate, meaning the dry season hits and the animals that don't want to estivate or they don't have access to water all year round can move to a different location. That is the tropical dry forest. We are hopping on another plane when we get done in India. and we are headed south to Kenya. So, Kenya is in a tropical grassland, otherwise known as the savannah. So, just a little bit, we've got a tropical grassland, otherwise known as the savannah. We've got in the savannah, our example, Kenya. Our abiotic factors, we've got more rain than the desert, but less than the tropical dry forest. We also have really compact soils. And we have fires that can get started by lightning. Meaning it can get so dry in the tropical grassland that if lightning strikes the wrong area, it can start a fire. So we got more rain than a desert, so it's not quite a desert. But we've got less rain than our tropical dry forest up in India. Our biotic factors, just like in the tropical dry forest, our plants are adapted for drought. Adapted for drought. And also grazing. Meaning there's a lot of grazers that live in the tropical grassland, so they're going to get pokey, they're going to get thistly, or they're going to get just really wispy, so they can't really get a good bite out of them. And our animals will migrate or burrow. So they have to avoid the hot sun because otherwise it might dehydrate them. So our animals will go from a place that is, or go from the really, really dry areas to a place that has water available to them. All right. We are hopping on another plane and moving from Kenya to Arizona. So we got the desert. Like I said, our example here is Arizona. Our abiotic factors, we'll just stick to less than 25 centimeters of rain in a year. And also, we have a lot of variable temperatures. A lot of people think that or think desert, hot, always hot. But when that sun goes down in the desert, it can get really, really chilly at night because there's nothing to like trap that heat and keep it there. So once the sun's gone, it can get really, really cold. And then we have our biotic factors. Our plants store water. I don't know why. Goodness gracious. Plants store water. I've got my little cactus friend over here. I water it once a week. Have since I got him in February. Doesn't need a heck of a lot of water. I literally just dump a little bit of my water bottle in it every Friday. Nothing too crazy. Our animals get their water from what they eat. So they don't go around drinking out of puddles and streams because those puddles and streams don't really exist in the desert. But if something were to come along and take a big old bite of this, obviously avoiding the little pokies, but big old bite of this, they would get all of the water that was stored in those plants. So that's the desert. To get to our next biome, we don't need to get on a plane. I could deal with a little bit of a road trip with y'all. We are headed down to Texas, to the temperate grassland. So we've done the tropical grassland. Now we're going to talk about the temperate grassland. Our example here, Texas. Start with our abiotic factors. We have warm to hot summers, cold winters, and moderate seasonal precipitation. Which essentially means that they don't necessarily have a wet season and a dry season, but they do have some seasons in which they get more rain than others. Our biotic factors. Plants adapt to be graze resistant. We got a lot of cows, a lot of grazers to eat all those grasses. So those plants try to adapt to avoid that grazing. And our animals adapt by camouflaging. Predation is a really big threat in the temperate grassland. So in order to avoid predation, animals will camouflage. or trying to blend into that environment so they don't get hunted as easily. All right. We're still in the western United States. So we're hopping in the car and going from Texas to LA. LA is considered a temperate woodland. Also known as a temperate shrubland. So our example is Los Angeles. Our abiotic factors let's see, we've got hot, dry summers. We've got cool, moist winters. But because of those hot, dry summers, we have to deal with the possibility of wildfires. Obviously, that is something we see a lot more now. But the temperate woodlands deal with wildfires a lot. So much so that some plants have adapted to require fire to germinate their seeds. So, in order for their seeds to start growing, they need to be exposed to fire, which I think is really cool. So, fire is actually a really natural part of a lot of ecosystems, unless they, get wildly out of control as they are currently. So, our biotic factors, we've got our fire resistant plants, not fireproof, but fire resistant. They try their hardest not to catch on fire. And our animals have really varied diets. Meaning they have to kind of diversify what they eat in order to get enough to eat to survive. Let's do one more. And I'll save the rest for the next time we're in class. We'll do one more. Let's see. So, we are currently in LA, and as much as I love you guys, I'm not necessarily sure we're ready for a cross-country road trip. So, we're going to get in a plane and head east to the temperate forest. Our temperate forest example, probably spelling that wrong, is Philadelphia. I've got it written as Philly in my notes. That is a really crooked line. Anyway, so we're in Philadelphia. I'm out of space, so I'm going to put our abiotic factors over here. We've got cool to moderate winters. We got warm summers. And precipitation year-round. No rainy season, no dry season. Just kind of rain or snow, whatever temperature it is outside. We got cold to moderate winters, really warm summers, and precipitation year round. Our biotic factors, we have both deciduous and coniferous trees. So we've got plants that adapt to the weather by losing their leaves. Those are the deciduous trees, the oaks, if you will, the ones that lose their leaves in the fall and regrow them in the spring. And then we have our coniferous trees, which are our trees that have the little needles that don't necessarily change seasonally and spread their seeds via cones. Huh? Let's see. And then our animals. They have to cope with cope with changing weather. They will do this by hibernating. They will do this by migrating. They will do this by changing their coats through the seasons in order to blend in with the changing environment. So we got through more of those than I thought we would. We will finish up when we are back in class.